So this is the trade section, probably the biggest section in Nexus, but not all that hard to understand. And we don't have to go into deep detail on a lot of this stuff. A lot of it we can just leave it at default. So some of the stuff I don't go into detail on. If you want to know more, just hover over these little icons here and get the help on it. Spread, I think, is pretty obvious, and the we do a fairly good estimation of spread internally. And so if you want to use it, and I suggest you do, just click it on and you're good to go. It'll estimate the spread um, in a fairly reasonable way that from the testing I've been able to do so far works remarkably well. So you can just turn it on and it'll take that a little bit from your profit. It has very little effect in Forex because Forex generally has very small spreads, at least on the major pairs. But in other things like Bitcoin or something that may be considerably larger, and you might notice the change quite a bit. Um, you can ignore this more or less. It's just a way of reducing the spread a little bit. Um, I found that it doesn't help at all. It was an idea, but ultimately it's not all that good. I would use dynamic spread. This is selected by default, but you don't get spreads until you check this manually. But when you do check it, this is the one that it will use. If you uncheck this, you can manually just set up what you want a spread to be. But the dynamic spread is pretty good. I would just use it if I was you. And you can set some things like what's the minimum movement I want to allow or whatever. The problem, of course, when you set that, if you change the assets you're on, this may have a meaningless value or end up with some value that hurts your trading in an unrealistic way. So better just to leave this at zero. Let the dynamic spread figure it all out for you. And under that, of course, you've got this slippage that you can add in as just a fixed amount of number of fixed loss you have on your entry and exit points separately, by the way, which TradingView doesn't have in it. The Strategy Tester down here doesn't have it. That's something I built in because depending, especially if you're doing something like limit orders, whether you're a limit order, like you could essentially say there is no slippage on the entry, but you still might have a slippage on the exit. Or so you can choose how you want to set this up based on your trading style and what you think is most realistic. Now, in the orders group, I think this is pretty obvious. Your three types of orders. Some might call a limit order a limit and a limit stop or something. There's sometimes people have different names for these. I suggest you just leave this on close unless you have some very specific reason for using open. Close will be your most accurate in this model. Um, FIFO is really for future development. It won't really behave any differently than by entry ID, so I suggest you just leave it there. And this here is it's more of a memory management than anything else. Like, so if you have some crazy system that's doing like 5,000 trades or something, we don't just crash and get an out of memory error or something. So I suggest just leave the default unless weird stuff starts happening like out of memory errors or whatever, and then we can look a little deeper in that. Um, this is just the thickness of a line showing up here. When you're doing limit or stop orders, there'll be a little line showing you this is where the it's been waiting, and that line will stop when the actual trade starts for real. And you can set how long you can wait, or you want to wait max amount of time before you get that limit order, or you can check this box and then it'll wait indefinitely, which I don't suggest you do. It's not a great way to trade. At some point, a trade's got to be invalid. And this allows you, instead of using the entry point of wherever you start that limit order, allows you to say, hey, I want a little bit above or a little bit below by some multiple of an ATR. And if you don't want to use ATR, you can put a fixed amount in. And if those two methodologies don't work for you, I'm not sure what to say. Maybe we can work something out with external signals. Um, but generally, I haven't had anyone who's needed more than one of those two methodologies. Now, the risk section of trading. The These two are not actual prices. So if you do want to plot these, make sure you have Nexus not inside the main screen. Otherwise, this is going to go crazy and get all mixed up. You want it down here because it is different values to your whatever your pricing may be, unless by coincidence it's the same. This betting summary, this is pretty nice, I'd say, for the most part. And some people might take exception to using the word betting. I just find it useful to try and use words that people don't use too often so that similar words aren't being used all the time that might have several different contexts. So, if you're a mind, you don't like the word betting, just translate it to risk calculations. It's the same thing. So here you can see there's some detail, and if you slide this down, I'm not going to bother now. You can look at it yourself, but I'll do it. What the hell? This is meant to be a longer form. So here you go. That'll give you an idea. I probably need to do a separate video to show you this stuff in detail. This is probably the wrong video for that. But you can probably guess what most of that is. And, if you really want to see what's going on, there it is. 2% exactly, which means right now we're not using dynamic betting, we're using fixed betting. And let's see, where was I up to? I'm just going to slide down here a bit. That's why I didn't want to click over here because I knew that I'd have to find this again. Okay, we're down to here. Okay, which is the trade risk section. Okay, so this is just some visual stuff. You can make that text bigger and smaller, change the color of the panel, so on. Initial capital is set at 1,000. Now, if you do change that and you want this to, show similar results, you got to go to your properties tab and change it here. There is no programmatic way to change this when you change it here. Similarly, the margins is the other one that you got to keep in sync for the same reasons. And so let me go, that might be a little further down. I have to show that a little bit later. Okay, I'll show the margins a little bit later when we get to it. Actually, I might have already passed it and not said anything. Hang on, yeah, the margins is actually for the leverage. So in the leverage, when you hold over here, it tells you the very last line, tells you how to calculate a margin, right? Or actually the line above it tells you how to calculate the margin. The last line is an example. But it's important that when you change the leverage, you go in the properties tab and you use that formula there to change this margin here. Because if you don't, you can get either margin calls unnecessarily or not get margin calls when they should be there in the strategy tester down here. It won't affect Nexus at all. It does its own calculations. But if you want to keep them reasonably in sync, you do need to do those updates. Almost forgot that. Okay, getting back to where we're up to. I think most of this is pretty obvious. You can choose what you want to base your risk calculations on, betting, as I call it. Your position sizing, most people are going to use percentage, but you could say, hey, I just want to risk $10 a trade. Or you can use dynamic where it will actually tell you how much to risk trade by trade, right? And it does a calculation to try and optimize your profit. And as you see, it's certainly saying about 9,000 is the PL. Now it's about 44,000. So it did a pretty good job on this particular trading system to bump you up from a standard 2% risk. These sections here, I'm not going to go into much detail. You can always go through the info and look at what it's all about. But this whole section is for that dynamic trading. And they're just two different mechanisms to smooth it out. So if you've got a really rough trading system that's just on the edge of profitability, turning dynamic trading on might make it worse just because it's kind of wildly going back and forth on the edge. You can try and fix that by using one or both of these methods to smooth out the amount it can move when it or will want to move when it calculates a different amount to bet to risk. So these are just smoothing techniques. I find that the calculations are good enough where they're basically never needed. Sorry, here, not down here. Now we'll go into the next section, what I accidentally pointed to, broker. I think this is pretty obvious, just the way broke, couple of ways you can put in broker fees. You know, pick which ones apply to your broker that you want to actually include in the calculations. Um, this here, this is really for leverage calculations. So that's why it's called margin. And most brokers will give margin calls based off probably around 100% of your account. Like so they might say, out of 100% of your account that will allow as a usage for your margin. Oh geez, I'm forgetting how to actually word it. It's probably better you just read the details here. But the bottom line is your broker's actual policy will be based probably around 100%. Um, and you'll have to read their terms to figure that out. And then out of that 100%, now they don't actually say you can use up to 100%, but they base how they do it around that. I know it's a little bit weird. So I'm going to suggest, unless you fully understand it, just leave this at 100. And then this is an important number. Um, we're trying to we try and stop you from getting margin calls. Now there's no system that can do everything perfectly, especially if you override and put silly numbers in. But we do a pretty good job at preventing that. And one of those mechanisms is not to get too close to the edge. And that's what this 5% is for, right? So if this was on the edge, this is giving you a little bit of a buffer, which helps allow a little extra for, estimated spread. It helps allow a little extra for slippage. Maybe at the end of the day, the price moves really sharply. This can help you not get caught. And I emphasize the word help. It doesn't mean you can't. It just means it makes it a little bit harder. Remember, these at the end of the day, these are all just models. They're not precise trading systems. There's no such thing. The only precise trading system is the one you do for real, with real money. So keep that in mind. Everything's a model. It just does its best to model reality. Here's a couple of extra ways you can limit both max and minimum. I always try and keep both sides of the coin. So of your risk. So you can say I want a minimum of 0.1% and a maximum of 10% or whatever you want. And you can also do it by fixed amounts. You can say, here's the amount that I want to trade maximum, minimum. So you can throw those in there. You have to click on these for the numbers to mean anything. You have to say, I'm using that, right? And so on. If you're getting so low that you're down at the minimums, odds are you probably need to improve your system. And I think that's it for the trading section, which is a little quicker than I expected, which is not a bad thing at all. So until the next section.